This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the X-Cast, where truth is in here. I'm Carl Sweeney, sitting in for Tony Black once again. Tony will be back with you to talk about F Emasculata next time out. The last episode of Season 2 we discussed was Humbug, but we're back today to talk about a less highly regarded episode, I think it's fair to say, which is the Calusari. Alright, and joining me to discuss this episode is Clara Cook. Hello Clara.
Hello.
Now, I think at this point we should just mention that there's been a longer gap between episodes than normal. There's been some recording problems with this episode. It was supposed to be Sarah Blair presenting, and there have been two attempts to record already, but we've had technological problems. So that means you, Clara, are discussing this episode for the third time.
Yeah, I'm well rehearsed.
Lucky you. And it's your first appearance on the podcast, so I'm going to ask you the 5 questions of X. But before we do, I just wanted to go over a few ways for listeners to get in touch with us. So our email address is thexfcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter if you go to @thex_cast. We've got a Facebook page. If you search for Xcast, you should find us. The full name is the Xcast Podcast, an X-Files fan group. And last but not least, a small favour to ask, if you could spend 60 seconds or so writing a review of us, of our podcast on iTunes, that would be helpful because it makes our podcast more visible to more listeners. All right, Clara, so if you're ready, I'll ask you the 5 questions of X. So the first one is, when did you first discover the X-Files?
So I first discovered the X-Files when I was around about 13, 14, and I was originally not allowed to watch it by my mum and dad forbade me from watching it. I think they thought that it was too adult and too scary for me. And I think my mother thought that I was going to be paranoid about the government spying on us,
Yep.
Although nowadays I think that's probable and no one's paranoid about it. So I used to sneak it. I used to sneak watching it late at night when my parents were asleep or doing something else. Or I used to flick between channels just to catch glimpses of it while my mum sat in the same room. And I think she knew I was trying to watch it.
Yeah.
But that made it all the more alluring,
Of course,
knowing that I wasn't allowed. So, and I loved it immediately. I thought it was really exciting and interesting.
So what stage was the series at when you discovered it? Was it the early days or was it a bit later on?
It was the early days. I think it must have been at the end of sort of season 1, I think.
Okay.
I do remember watching Space as a teenager.
Yeah.
But I remember the last episode of season 1. What is that called? I can't remember
The
now.
Erlenmeyer Flask.
Yeah, I remember watching that as a teenager on TV and being just in awe when Scully pulls out this, frozen alien embryo and just being so excited about it. And in those are the days before we really had a way of recording television. I mean, there were videotapes, but my parents didn't own a video player. So it was really like a glimpse, like I'd watch it and then I wouldn't get to rewatch it. So it was trying to catch it when it was on television without my parents knowing was quite a logistical feat.
Yeah, like you say, it's one of those things where if you missed an episode, you might be years until you got another chance to see it.
Exactly.
What's your favourite episode? You mentioned a couple there. You mentioned Space. I'm assuming it's not that.
No. No. So my favourite episode, there's lots of episodes I love, obviously. There's some that are really, really good and I'll rewatch time and time again. But my favourite episode is actually Paper Hearts. I love it because I always was attracted to the storyline of Mulder's sister being abducted and, being missing and him searching for her. And I liked this episode because it gave a very sort of human, rational kind of, but also alternative explanation for why Samantha went missing and what happened to her. I liked the music of the episode, the sort of little sort of fairy tale type tune that plays throughout it. That's also quite sinister. The red dot that Mulder sort of follows in his dreams to find the abducted girls. And also the main character, Roche. Is it Roche's
John
name,
John Lee Roach, yeah.
John Lee Roach. And how boring and ordinary he is, but also yet how sinister and horrible he is as well. and how he and Mulder are like perfect foils for each other. They're just equally smart with each other. And also because Scully's quite protective of Mulder in the episode.
Yeah.
and David Duchovny really does act. He does well in that episode.
Oh, he does. I think that's one of his best performances. And like you mentioned, Roach. I think what's good about that is he's very credible as somebody you can believe he was a decent vacuum cleaner salesman, but you can also believe the sinister side of him too. And I think it's a fantastic performance. Yeah, it's a great episode. It's a great choice. So Paper Hearts is in season 4. What's your favourite season overall?
So in the past, I think when I was younger, I would have said like season 5 or 6, or I mean, I might have said season 3 actually. In the past, I was really attracted to the character of Mulder. He was my favourite character. I felt as a teenager as well, I felt kind of ill at odds with the rest of the world. I didn't feel like I fitted in, you know how teenagers feel. And I felt like I was eccentric like Mulder, and Mulder doesn't fit in the FBI, and he's kind of crazy. But actually, as an adult, I associate more now with Scully. As a woman now, and having had some of the experiences that women have in their lives, not being abducted by aliens, but like, having health problems, having to go to hospital, having a sort of close connection or relationship with a man who sometimes can be crazy. I'm thinking of my husband, my lovely eccentric husband, and just also having to work in the workplace as a woman, trying to prove yourself and that sort of thing. I really associate with Scully now. I really see a lot of the things that she goes through. So as an adult, I think season 4, which there's a lot of Scully episodes in season 4, and a lot of episodes to do with her health and her cancer, and showing her sort of trying to cope with her cancer and her work at the same time.
Yeah, so you're thinking of stuff like Memento Mori, I guess, and in a slightly different tack, Never Again.
Never Again, I think, is really good. It's that episode at the time as a teenager or as a kid, I was like, didn't really see the point. I thought it was, I just thought she was throwing a tantrum, But now I think I see how obnoxious and difficult Mulder can be. The episode is about her trying to prove that she doesn't need him, and I thought that was quite well written and well played.
Yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in season 4. But I'm interested in what you say about Mulder, because that sort of mirrors my feelings too, in that when I first saw the series, he was the character I sort of latched onto. But over the fullness, as time's gone on, his behaviour at times is not ideal, is it? He's a great character, but I also feel the same way, that I associate more strongly with Scully as I get older. So what about, who is your favourite character overall? We've talked a bit about Mulder and Scully. Now, it can be one of those two, or it can be any other character who's appeared in the X-Files. Who's your favourite character?
Obviously, I always love Mulder and Scully. They are the ultimate characters of the show. But I do really have a fondness for Skinner. I feel that Skinner is really, he's not given enough meat in storylines. I feel like more could have been done with his character throughout the entire series. And I'm hoping that in the new one, there's more scenes with him and more, and he gets more to chew on. I think Skinner has a real sort of, I just feel underneath it, Skinner has quite a sense of humour, like a dry, deadpan sense of humour. You only see glimpses of it occasionally, but I feel like it could come out. He just seems long-suffering, but I think he's probably quite an emotional, kind of intense, intelligent guy. I'm a big fan of Skinner. I feel like we don't see enough. But I like how he, in the beginning we didn't know what his allegiances were, and then by the end of it, he really is a real faithful, loyal, supportive person who's basically trying to do the right thing, I think, a lot of the time. But I also like Doggett as well, and it's controversial. But a lot of people don't like Doggett, but I feel that Doggett is a good example of somebody who is just like a basic bread and butter cop. He's a real professional law enforcement type of guy, and he's plunged into this crazy world of paranormal phenomena. I thought he was a good foil for Scully at that time, and I would like to have seen more scenes with Doggett and Mulder. I think the two of them are such opposites that it would have been fun to see. And other than that, I guess any sort of a guest starring expert like Chuck in this episode, or that strange forensic fire specialist in the episode Fire, who's really excited.
Yeah, I can't remember his name.
Turned on by fire. Yeah. Or the lone gunman, like anybody who's a little bit crazy out there that Mulder has to talk to. And there's people that he talks to, like this guy called Danny, doesn't he, on the phone?
Does,
I think it is. You never see. I just feel like some of those characters, I really wish we could have known a bit more about them. But I like the little bit characters that come along.
Just to go back to Skinner, who you mentioned first. Yeah, I think a lot of people agree that he was underused in the new episodes. So as season 11 approaches, we all want more Skinner. That's the message I want to send.
Yeah, and more Skinner and maybe a few more sort of specialist experts.
Okay, more specialist experts, yeah.
Maybe Chuck.
Well, we're going to talk about Chuck. We'll come on to him. Final question then, Clara. So what is your favourite moment from the show? Whether it's a scene or just a brief exchange, what would it be?
So favourite moment, I pretty much like any moment. I'm a real shipper.
Oh.
So I pretty much like, oh no. No, she's not. No, yeah, I am a real shipper. So I like pretty much, remember I started watching it as a teenage girl, okay? So that's why.
Yeah.
I like any moment where Mulder and Scully have a romantic moment, where they hold hands or look into each other's eyes. But I have to say my favourite moment is the end of Pusher, where Mulder's playing Russian roulette with the guy whose name I cannot remember. Modell, that's it. I can't remember the names of the villains, which is really awful, but I just remember their faces.
Yeah.
In that episode, you can really see that Mulder's really trying to fight him on a mental level. He's trying to battle him sort of psychically, and it's just a really tense moment. And knowing that Mulder might possibly actually shoot Scully, and he's like pointing the gun at her and he's telling her to run, and he's trying really hard not to pull the trigger and not to shoot her. And that he might even shoot himself. And the look on David Duchovny's face when he puts the gun to his head and he pulls the trigger is just really chilling.
Yeah, that's a great sequence. I know Tony would agree strongly with your choice as well. Pusher's his favourite episode, as everybody knows. Yeah, I think I'm more of a shipper than I like to admit, to be honest. So, yeah, feel free to, indulge your shippiness in this episode as much as you want. All right then, Clara, so that's the 5 questions of X. Let's go on to talk about the Calusari. The Calusari is the 21st episode of Season 2 of The X-Files. Its original air date was April 14th, 1995. It was written by Sarah B. Charno and directed by Michael Vejar. Now, I'm not sure about the pronunciation there. It's Vejar. And the plot sees Mulder and Scully investigate the death of a young boy whose family is then plagued by a series of tragic events.
I don't understand. There's already been a formal inquest.
We're here apart from that investigation. We have reason to believe something may have been overlooked.
Like what?
The possibility Teddy may have been helped onto the tracks.
Oh my God.
There were over 100 witnesses. We saw Teddy ourselves. He was chasing a balloon. There was no one else around. It was an awful accident, but that's all it was. An accident.
Do you have any reason to suspect someone may have wanted to hurt Teddy?
He was just a baby. Why would anybody want to hurt him?
Look, I don't know what you're getting at. We love Teddy. If you're suggesting that this is anything like that woman who drowned her kids in the lake, you're way out of line.
Mrs. Holvey, did you hear anything in the bathroom right before Teddy disappeared?
I already told the inquest. I heard nothing.
All right, Clara. So out of 10, what would you give this episode?
Probably about a 6, I think. 6 out of 10. Maybe, possibly even a 5.5. It's bordering between a 5 and a 6 to me. I have to say, I enjoyed it a lot more watching it for like the 3rd time than I did the first time I watched it when I was younger. I'm sure we'll go on to talk about this, but I think that in terms of, the plot's okay. It's not the best plot of an episode that I've ever sort of watched, but it's the fact that Mulder and Scully are so passive in it prevents it from being a higher rating.
Yeah.
They don't really do anything.
No, they don't.
So I find that's something I'm not particularly fond of.
My rating's even lower, I'm afraid. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10.
Ah,
Yeah.
that is low.
Yeah. Well, I gave Humbug 8 last time, so I think this needs to get, this is half as good as Humbug in my view. Yeah, one of my notes is the same as yours. Mulder and Scully don't really do a great deal, which is fine in some episodes, but I don't really think it works here. I think it is an effective episode in places, but in other places it's unintentionally hilarious, which, does have its own entertainment value. I do have some issues with the story. I'm not convinced everything adds up to a cohesive whole, but I need your help to help me figure everything out. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about the representation of Romanians in this episode?
I have a pretty big issue with that, and it borders on sort of like, I would say, I don't know if it's naivety in the part of the storytellers or whether it's just outright laziness, but it's on the level of Hell Money, and Testos Bikos, or however you say it, or the one with the El Chupacabra, that's set in a sort of immigrant camp, and I just feel it's insulting to Mexicans, to be honest. I feel this is insulting to Romanians, and I don't feel it is particularly a Romanian type of story or anything to do with Romanians. I think they just chose Romania as a sort of stock Eastern European country. I mean, there's nothing in here that's explicitly, I guess the Calusari, but then the Calusari, as far as I could tell from my research, are a Romanian dance troupe.
Yeah, they are. So... No, they are. They are. I was going to talk about that. Yeah.
You can YouTube them.
Yeah, I've actually put a video on our Facebook page this afternoon of you can watch the Calusari's sort of ritual dance. All I can say is they don't appear to resemble the group from this episode that much on the surface. But anyway, yeah, the representation of Romanians is cliched at best. Yeah, we'll talk about that with some specific examples as we go along. Now, with last week's episode, Humbug, I had quite a bit of background information on the episode. I don't have that much on this one, but I've got a couple of quotes from Frank Spotnitz, and he said that the writer, Sarah Charno, had been a doctor of Eastern medicine who'd become a TV writer, and so she had a lot of esoteric knowledge that none of the rest of us had about all kinds of things, and that led into the writing of this episode. And Spotnitz also said that Chris Carter spent a lot of time in the editing room trying to figure out how to make this episode more terrifying. That was an important experience because I saw how much better something could become if you didn't give up, said Spotnitz. So I do like that idea that even this was never going to be a great episode, but that with hard work they could, it might have been an absolute disaster, but they managed to improve it with a bit of graft. I like that.
Yeah, and I think the editing is probably one of the better aspects of the episode. Yeah, I can see how they've improved it. They did the best that they could with what they had, I suppose.
Yeah, I think Mark Snow's music does a lot of the heavy lifting. The score's fine. Those quotes, by the way, I took from a book called The Complete X-Files, written by Matt Hurwitz and Chris Knowles. It's a good reference guide for anyone interested in the series. So it's one of the few episodes written by a woman, Sarah Charno. There are only a handful of episodes over the whole run of the series written by women. She wrote this and Aubrey, I believe, earlier in the season. She was married to someone called Stu Charno, who went on to play the killer in Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose in season 3. The director, Michael Vijar, this was his only X-Files episode. He's got a long list of other credits, though, including quite a few episodes of different versions of Star Trek. So what did you think about the overall look of the episode? Did the director do a decent job?
Yeah, I think the director did a decent job. I mean, I think the problems lie in the actual dialogue and the story. So I think that though some of it appears quite hokey and over the top, and it's like a homage to The Omen, really, isn't it?
It is,
so
yeah.
There's lots of, even the house that they're all living in, the little boy, who I realised actually, I think it might have been you that said it was the little boy that was in Conduit.
Yeah, that's right.
Who I didn't recognise. He looked completely different. All of that it does seem overly dramatic at times, but I think the director kind of probably had to do that in the way he shot it, because otherwise, if you just played it more straight, the story was even more ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you've got to commit to it, haven't you? And
yeah.
I think you did. Yeah, like you say, I think anyone who's seen something like The Omen or The Exorcist, this episode is very much it's a retread of that kind of thing. Now, unlike when they did an episode like Ice, which was a bit of a riff on The Thing, this doesn't really do anything interesting with it, I'm afraid. As horror, it's quite effective. In fact, this will only be of interest to UK listeners, but this is the only episode in the entire series that the BBFC, which is the British Board of Film Classification, they assigned this episode an 18 rating when it was released, when it was classified for video and DVD. And it's the only episode of the series that gets an 18. And that's for the strong horror contained within.
Yeah, I was kind of guessing at what point would be an 18 rated scene in the actual episode in the show. I was like, well, it has to be this, has to be that, and I went through all the different sort of scenes, but then it hadn't occurred to me till I watched it again. But actually, I reckon it's the teaser. I reckon it's the first few minutes of the episode before the credits, because having that shown on terrestrial television at that time, I think it's quite a dramatic, daring thing to do. I mean, it's like the death of a child, so... I
think you're right. I think it is the teaser sequence. I'm sure I've read that before, but I couldn't find anything to confirm that when I was looking this morning. Yeah, I think, like I say, child death is a tricky thing, and I think that's the reason they got such a high rating. Yeah, just before we move on, like we've already alluded to, the Calusari is a real thing. It comes from the pagan tradition in Romania. It was like a group led by a great priest who'd perform dances to fight evil spirits. But then as the country, as Christianity became stronger in the country, the tradition sort of dissipated. But some people still believe that watching the Calusari dance brings good luck for the rest of the year. But the striking thing, if you look at a picture of them, they're very different in appearance to the group we see in this episode. The real life troupe, they have a predominantly white costume, beaded hats. They carry coloured sticks and they wear coloured ribbons. So they don't really resemble what we see on screen here. The people we see in the episode look a bit more like not entirely dissimilar to the kindred in the episode Genderbender.
Yeah, they're sort of dressed almost a little bit like... my father-in-law is Jewish, and so we visit him sometimes up in North London, and he lives in he's not Orthodox, but he lives in a very Orthodox Jewish community, and people are dressed in a very similar way to the individuals in this episode. They look a little bit like they're dressed like Hasidic Jews, which I think that, yeah, like you said with the kindred, I think the costume department just said, how can we make them look old and severe and European? And put them in these outfits. I mean, they're not Hasidic Jews, but they don't look Romanian either. Do you know what I mean? They don't. Well, they definitely don't look like the Calusari dancers.
No, they don't at all. I mean, the Calusari, a dance to ward off evil spirits, that could have been an interesting addition to the episode, couldn't it?
It's like a bit like the rain dance and Rain Man or whatever. Yeah. More than Scully just standing there like, what?
Maybe one day. Maybe we'll get a sequel
one day.
That's more realistic. So I'm giving it a 4. You're giving it a 6/5.5. On IMDb, this gets a 7.7 out of 10. And that's from 2,272 people have rated it. So just to put that in context for the rest of Season 2, this episode gets a higher rating than the episode 3. It gets a higher rating than Firewalker, Excelsis Day, Fresh Bones, and Fearful Symmetry. I mean, I would put a couple of those episodes above this one.
Yeah, I put Firewalker above this one.
Yeah, I'd put Fresh Bones above it, definitely. But this gets the same score as Blood, Aubrey, and Dodd Calm. So I think the fan consensus is it tends to be one of the one of the least remembered episodes from the second season and least highly appreciated. I mean, I was looking forward to watching it again because it's been a while since I've seen it, and it's not one I've watched a huge amount of times over the years. So it's always fun to watch one that you have, that you don't know inside out. Yeah, so now it's time to take an in-depth look at the Calusari. Okay, so the opening sequence, we've mentioned this already. It's a family day at the park. The parents, who we later find out are called Maggie and Steve Holvey, they've got ice creams for the two boys, and the boys are Teddy, who's the youngest boy, and Charlie, who's the older boy, played by Joel Palmer. As you said, he's in the episode Conduit as well, as a different character. So the mum takes Teddy into the toilets. In brief, the balloon is being controlled. It tempts the boy out back into the park, and he lures him into the path of a train, which kills him. So I think it's an effective opening, to be honest. I don't think the rest of the episode deals with it very well, in the sense that if you're starting an episode with such a tragic occurrence, you would expect that to be considered in a more thoughtful manner afterwards. Do you know what I mean? So straight after this, we get a 3-month jump, and I think the only reason they did that is it allows them to sort of minimise the loss that the parents are feeling. Whereas I think if they'd have confronted that, it might have made for a better episode.
There's several things in the first scene that don't seem to make a huge amount of sense to me. So, for one thing, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I don't know. So I'm not, but I was quite shocked at the idea that Steve the father would give. So obviously Teddy lets go of his balloon. Teddy's like a 2-year-old, right? I mean, you should tie a balloon string around a 2-year-old's wrist because they're never going to hold it, But anyway, he lets go of the balloon and he starts crying. Or he drops his ice cream, something happens. He maybe loses both. Anyway, he starts crying, and in order to stop him crying, they take the balloon away from the older child and give it to the younger child. And of course, the older boy's older boy's got a look of hatred on his face. And I thought this was unrealistic. I thought this was bad parenting. Bad parenting to take a toy from one sibling and give it to another. But having since talked to Sarah Blair, who also does this podcast, who has 2 small children, she has said to me, "You will do anything to get your child to stop crying." So actually maybe it's quite realistic. And then another bit of bad parenting I thought was when the mother then ties her son to the sink in the toilet and then gets to go to the toilet in the cubicle and leaves him out there, which allows him to be tempted away by the balloon and onto the tracks of the train. So in a way, I thought those two things were quite unrealistic. Also, the idea that this child would get onto the tracks and no one would rush out to grab the child. You know, the train driver didn't seem to make any effort to slow down the train.
Yeah.
He was just like, get off the tracks. It's like a 2-year-old, you know. But I thought there were some really effective moments. The balloon coming back down to rest, you know, behind the brother. And now he's got his balloon back. You know, his brother's just been, you know, smushed by a train, but it's okay because he's got his balloon back. And the look of sort of sinister satisfaction on his face. I mean, right away you're aware that although you don't know exactly what happened, that the older son has had some sort of part in the death of his brother.
Yeah, now this is what confused me though, because, like you say, because of his facial expression and how passive he is, Charlie seems involved and he seems, you know, evil at this point. But the rest of the episode leaves us to believe that obviously it's not Charlie, it's his evil twin. Because like later when the dad dies in the garage, Charlie's distraught. So I couldn't work out why he's not bothered here, and yet later on he's much more emotionally affected.
Yeah, I mean, I also said that as well. I said it's not clear if evil is possessing Charlie or Charlie and Michael. Evil's possessing both of them, or Charlie's just possessing Michael, or that Michael himself is evil and is possessing Charlie. It's all pretty confusing. And I think even the Calusari themselves don't seem to know. It would have been better to have a clearer thread running through the episode of what was the actual thing that Mulder Scully and the Calusari and, you know, the family were basically trying to defeat. Is it evil? Is it Satan? Is it some sort of possession? Is it an evil twin? You know, it's not clear.
Yeah, there's quite a lot in the mix in this episode, and I'm not sure it all blends together as well as it could have.
Yeah, it just kind of weakens the story, really. It sort of forces the audience to... Well, as an audience member myself, I just sort of felt like I just kind of given up on the story by that point. I was like, oh, whatever. Which means you're not very emotionally invested in the episode.
No, I think that's right, yeah. All right, so we get a bit of a time jump, and then we're at the University of Maryland, because we meet for the first time the character of Chuck Burks, played by the actor Bill Dow. Yeah, what do you think of Burks? Now, Burks appears 6 times in total in the X-Files. This is the first time. He's in the series, his last appearance I think is in season 8 in the episode Bad Law, but I don't think he was intended as a recurring character at this stage, because the same actor, he's already been in the episode of Jersey Devil, but he also appears in War of the Coprophages as a different character.
Yeah, and I love his appearance in that episode when he's like playing this hypochondriac, paranoid doctor. Yeah, it's very funny. Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't remember Chuck, I mean, I'm surprised, but Chuck is basically one of Mulder's... How would you describe him? Who is Chuck Burks exactly?
So he's like one of the experts that Mulder consults, but he's not an official FBI expert because he's at a university, I think, isn't he? So he's just like I would say it's like one of the people that Mulder's collected. Mulder sort of collects these people and uses them when he needs to use them. But he also seems to have like a genuinely friendly relationship with these individuals. So I think you get the feeling that Mulder doesn't have many friends. So these people are like acquaintance stroke friends. But yeah, I assume that Chuck, I don't know, does some sort of studies, or he's some sort of professor or researcher at the university. And I have a feeling that Chuck probably is considered to be just as strange in by his own, you know, amongst his own peers in his own sphere as Mulder is at the FBI.
Yeah, so. And I think you get the impression that Scully's not particularly impressed by his approach. Yeah, it's a shame we only see him a few times. Whenever we do, he's always good fun. So what's happening here is that Mulder's been contacted by the county medical examiner because the balloon in the photograph is blowing the wrong way. Is basically why. And Chuck Burks and Mulder have a look at it, and they think that a ghost is involved or some kind of poltergeist activity because they've done something to the photograph and they've seen what looks like a person holding a balloon. Scully naturally doesn't buy it, does she? She's not having it.
I have to say, right at the beginning, when Mulder's explaining the case to Scully, he actually seems quite bored about it. Like, he just seems quite like nonchalant and non-committed. And I wonder if this is because David Duchovny was just tired that day, or whether it's because this episode comes at the end of the season, and maybe everyone was just kind of like, or maybe he did, maybe the script's just not believable. But it didn't seem like Mulder or Scully, either of them, wanted to investigate this. And the bit that made me really laugh was the idea that Mulder called up the weather service to ask which way the wind was blowing that day. Can you imagine that call? Can you imagine if you work at the weather service and you get a call from an FBI agent asking you what day, which way the wind was blowing, like on a day 3 months ago? Do you know what I mean? And it's the idea that Mulder did that because he knew Scully was going to question his evidence.
She had a good one-liner, didn't she? Because Mulder says that helium balloons, he learned in kindergarten that they just go up. And Scully said, did you ever learn about wind in kindergarten? So that's one of the few humorous moments in the episode. Just on the issue of Mulder being bored, I think it's another example of, considering it's the death of a child, especially later when he talks to the parents, he says something that's a bit tactless, I think. Because he straight away comes out to them and he says that he thinks the boy might have been pushed in front of a train. And he's saying that with very little evidence, really.
Considering the fact that the teaser really is every parent's worst nightmare, like turning around for a second and your child has gone towards impending danger and doom. I mean, truly that would have every parent watching the show think, kind of upset.
Yeah.
And then you're right, the rest of the episode is like, well, oh well, that happened.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't weigh as heavily on the minds of our characters as it should. That's what I would say. So we go to the Holvey residence. We see Golda, which is the grandmother, for the first time. Man, she's an interesting character. Mulder and Scully interview the parents about this case. Scully sees the grandmother draw a protective swastika on the boy, Charlie. I mean, my advice to Golda would be this. I mean, she turns out to be right in the end, doesn't she? I think the way she presents her arguments in this episode is lacking, to be honest.
Well, she doesn't speak English,
no.
Right? Or does she? Maybe that's the problem. I mean, maybe it's just maybe it's a language barrier thing.
Maybe,
I don't know.
But
also she does seem to be a lot of quite antagonistic, doesn't she?
I understand the swastika here is meant to be a protective symbol, but even so, I mean, I think doing it in full view of Scully, you can understand why that would raise questions. So what happens here? The smoke detector goes off, some of the lights go out, so you get the sense that something's very wrong here as well.
And that is really obvious and unsubtle storytelling. Like that right there. I mean, right away, that sort of jumped out at me when I was watching it, was that Mulder asks, have there been any strange events or any odd things happening? And as soon as he says that, the smoke detector goes off and the lights go down.
Yeah, it's a bit crass, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because Golda argues with Maggie, the mother. She's speaking in Romanian, and she says something about you married a devil, you have a devil child. Again, I just question the wisdom of her having this discussion in front of Mulder and Scully. You'd think you'd wait until afterwards, but hey.
All she did was marry an American employee of the State Department. I mean,
yeah.
I feel it's a little bit harsh.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you actually, because obviously, in a certain sense, Golda turns out to be correct with some of her analysis. So does that mean, is she wrong about Steve? I mean, we don't get any other sense that he's evil. Is it just that she thinks everybody's evil and she just happened to be right with eventually?
I think it's that her daughter Maggie has turned against the old ways of the Romanian. I'm saying this with like the greatest degree of irony and sarcasm, but Maggie has turned away from the old ways, the old spiritual ways of the Romanian tradition, and married like a Western, American man from the godless place that is, I don't know, Washington, Virginia. And it's kind of gives the idea that Maggie hasn't been able to integrate into American society, that her Romanian roots aren't compatible with the American dream or something, which is funny because that's just not the case of America. I mean, there's lots and lots of people in America from many different parts of the world who've all managed to live in America quite successfully, and it's a similar thing with Hell Money, this idea that this Chinese community in America hasn't been able to reconcile their Chinese heritage with the American law enforcement rules or whatever. It's just very heavy-handed.
It is, yeah. I think this one does it slightly worse than Hell Money, because I think this is particularly heavy-handed. But yeah, the X-Files is a bit of a checkered history with episodes about migrant communities and experiences, and this is a striking example of that. So then we get a scene in the X-Files office. They talk about the history of the swastika, that it's actually possibly been drawn as a protective symbol.
They also get that wrong as well.
Oh, do they?
Sorry. Yeah, it's just a minor point. They say that I think Mulder says the swastika's been around since medieval times, but that's actually not true. It's been around since the time of ancient Greece. And at the time when I was watching it, I was like, they could have just Googled this. But then, obviously, I realised that when the actual script was being written back in the 90s, They didn't have Google. They didn't have Google, did they?
No, which means that A, it's easy to get things wrong, but also B, it's easier to put something in an episode, be less rigorous about fact checking, and they didn't know that DVD sets would be scrutinised and so on. So
yes, I thought I was being a bit uncharitable there. I was like, that was a nitpick that I probably should let go.
Yeah, well, no, they should get these things right. Scully's theory is then that there's something called Munchausen by proxy is at hand, which is when a parent or a guardian deliberately induces medical symptoms in a child to cause them harm. So Scully suspects the old woman, I think, is the impression we get here.
Yeah, she suspects Golda, and I think it's strange that she also has to explain what Munchausen by proxy is to Mulder, who has actually done a psychology degree. I mean, maybe it never came. We do forget that. I mean, the audience does forget that Mulder did a psychology degree, because I think it's mentioned a few times, and then forever after in the whole series, anything that's got anything to do with anything medical, Scully explains to him. I guess this is a way of Scully explaining what Munchausen by proxy is to the audience.
Yeah, it's for the benefit of the audience rather than the characters, I think. Yeah, it's a good point. And in season 6, in the episode Terms of Endearment, Mulder forgets that he's a psychologist, because he actually says, "I'm not a psychologist," infamously. Yeah, and sometimes it happens with Scully as well, where she, she'll be talking to another scientist and she'll have something medical explained to her. Again, it's a way of catching up the audience, I suppose. I suppose it's necessary. They go to the State Department to see the father, and he talks about things have been strained since the mother-in-law moved in. I think you get the impression that he moved to Romania and then the family came back to America.
I guess the idea is that he met Maggie in Romania, maybe when he was working there as a state official or something,
Yeah,
and then
they moved back.
The idea, so he explains that he once found Golda throwing chicken guts on the roof. And that, I actually laughed out loud when I was watching the episode, when I heard that, because the idea of this little old lady standing in front of the house, with all the neighbours sort of watching through their windows, as she sort of swings chicken guts, gets a real good swing with her arm and then really throws them high up onto the roof. I mean, in what way could chicken guts on the roof remotely protect you from evil? I mean, what? Like, you know what I mean? Just
Well, don't knock it till you've tried it, Clara.
I mean, is there any reality in this? I mean, is there any sort of tradition anywhere in the world where people put the guts of an animal on their roof?
But again, this goes back to my theory that Golda just needs to be a bit more thoughtful, because why do it when Steve's watching, Do it when no one's looking, if you're going to do that. So Scully arranges for Karen Kosseff to interview Charlie. Now, she's the woman who gave Scully counselling in the episode Irresistible, and she'll appear later on.
And she's actually a nicer counsellor to Scully than she is a child therapist. I mean, she's probably one of the most unsympathetic social workers I've ever seen portrayed on television.
Yeah, and she turns up at a very inopportune time as well.
But yet doesn't really do anything.
No.
doesn't help anyone.
It almost didn't need to be the same character, it seemed like to me, because I don't think they mention that Scully's got a history with her at this point.
She doesn't in any way help the situation, but then in the same way, neither do Scully or Mulder. They just kind of observe, really. They
Well, hang on, we're jumping ahead a bit here, because she doesn't turn up until a bit later. So what happens next is that they're back at the house. The parents are arguing they're in earshot, but they're out of the room, while Mulder and Scully are stood with Golda and the boy, Charlie. Yeah, not brilliant. And then in the car, so they go to the car, Steve and the boy, and he has this accident where he gets caught in the garage door mechanism. One thing I read was that Chris Carter had this idea, he wanted to do something where somebody gets caught in in the garage mechanism like this, and he was basically looking for an episode to put it into. So what did you think about this part of the episode?
I actually thought this was really effective.
Yep.
I thought this was really effective. I think it is actually kind of a scary idea. I personally have always been a bit phobic about gears and mechanical parts of mechanized technology. I don't like the idea of being caught in a gear and kind of grinded a bit. I mean, so I actually thought this was pretty scary, and I think there's some silly things here. Now we know not to wear ties around electric
Yeah.
garage doors. But I think the idea of him hanging and him sort of choking, and sort of kicking the window with his foot and sort of spasming and everything. I thought that was pretty horrible, especially with the little boy
in front
watching,
of his son, yeah. And interestingly,
seeing it.
Charlie's kind of distraught here, whereas he wasn't bothered about Teddy.
He doesn't want his father to die.
No.
You get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So pretty horrific. The police turn up and they find that Golda's room is kind of decked out ceremonially, with candles and a dead chicken. Yeah, Golda, she just needs to tidy up after herself, doesn't she?
Oh, Golda.
You're asking for trouble.
Golda.
We see the Calusari arrive from the window. We see them. So it's a group of men. We don't fully know what their function is yet. Mulder investigates the garage. He finds this ash-type substance, which is kind of important to the plot, but we'll talk about that a bit later. It's another one of those elements that's in the mix. I'm not sure it adds up to much. Scully's standing by her theory at this point. Munchausen by proxy is what's happening, is what she thinks. The garage door sort of kicks back into life, and Golda stood outside with the Calusari and she says, "Stay away from our house."
I actually really like the idea of child abuse being a theme in an X-Files episode. I just don't think it works in this one. I mean, child abuse to the majority of people, child abuse, it seems to be something that's just so sort of strange, and people don't, people struggle to understand it. Like, how could someone be so cruel to a child? So I think in a way, and a lot of things in a lot of the X-Files episodes that Mulder and Scully investigate things that just seem weird and frightening and scary and strange, and child abuse is one of those things, and I think it's a good theme for an X-Files episode, but they don't do it very well here, and they haven't done it very well. There was another episode in an orchard, I think, in a later series.
Schizogeny, I think it's called.
Yeah, and there's a sort of theme of child abuse in that as well, and they don't do it very well there either. I think it's just perhaps it's just too much of a delicate subject.
Yeah, I think it's kind of diluted here by the presence of other...
demon child.
Yeah, basically, yeah. They go back to the X-Files office and they find out that this ash-type substance contains nothing organic or inorganic. So they don't really know what it is, which leads them back to Chuck Burks. They go back to his lab and he tells them it's called vibhuti, which is a type of holy ash. And it's apparently some kind of substance created during the presence of spirit beings.
And Scully makes a good joke here about the Last Supper. Chuck used to, I don't know, go to India on, I don't know, summer holidays or something, and there was a holy man who made a meal appear out of nowhere. And she said, "Did you take a picture and see the images of like Christ and the disciples in the Last Supper?" And it gets quite a wry smile from Mulder. But yet again, you're right, they are joking in an episode where a child was like smushed by a train and a guy's just been hanged by his own tie. So you're a little bit like...
Yeah, I know. As this episode went on, I felt more and more sorry for the mother, I have to say. But she seemed to be bearing up quite well, considering that, her son has been killed, her other son is evil, her husband has been killed in a garage door mechanism, and something bad happens to her mother later. So, yeah, she did well, I think, considering. They go back to the house. Well, we see the house again, and we see the Calusari and Golda performing some kind of ritual involving a chicken, and they summon the spirit of a child. We don't really know what's going on at this point, I don't think. This is the point at which Karen Kosef arrives at the door. So, as I said, she appeared in Irresistible, and she'll later appear in the episode Elegy. And the same actress, Christine Wills, will appear in Founder's Mutation as a different character in Season 10 as Sister Mary. Yeah, but she turns up at the wrong time, really, because... in a way at the right time. She sees Charlie collapsed on the floor sick, smoke coming out from the door, and then she sees she sees a bit of what Golda and the Calusari are doing. So she runs out, doesn't she?
She runs out. Is she going to call 911?
Yeah.
Is she running out and looking randomly for Mulder and Scully?
She's quite fortuitous that Mulder and Scully turn up at this point, isn't she?
Yeah, and Mulder sort of drives into the actual sidewalk. Like, so did he have some sort of sense that something bad was going down? He's driving really fast. Like, that just seems... pulls up and you think, well, either Mulder's a terrible driver, which is possible, or, maybe she somehow paged them or something, like, and they somehow know. I mean... That seemed like a strike of fate there, really, that she met him right at that moment, so they could go help.
I think just before she runs out, what happened was that Golda grabs Charlie in, and she's locks the door, and she's brandishing a knife in his direction. Then some kind of evil presence sort of thwarts the ritual, blows out the candles, throws furniture around, etc. And the boy picks up 2 dead chickens, it looks like to me. They come back to life, he throws them at Golda, and they peck her to death. Is that what happens? That's what seemed like.
Yeah, so I think she dies of a heart attack, but they pecked at her eyes. I think it would take a lot longer to peck someone to death. I mean, human skulls are pretty hard, so I would imagine. And surely you've got to fight a chicken. But yet again, Sarah Blair did tell me a horrific story where her cousin was actually terribly badly pecked by a chicken when he was a toddler. And she says that actually chicken attacks are like how they're portrayed in this episode. There's a lot of clucking and flapping wings, and you can actually get quite badly injured from a chicken attack. I personally found it quite funny, having never witnessed a chicken attack. I don't have that experience to draw from. So I was like, she was killed by a chicken? Seriously? But I think you're supposed to think that she died from the shock of it, like a heart attack, basically. She's an old lady,
Yeah.
you know.
I've been quite hard on Golda, but yeah, it's not a good way to go. And I think as presented, it is quite funny, or at least I found it funny. Unintentionally funny. But it might just be because I'm a terrible person, I'm not sure. What happens next is that Mulder and Scully, so they find more ash. So they find more of this holy ash. And they discover a few more signs which lead them to believe that the old woman and the Calusari were trying to protect the family rather than harm them. The mother, Maggie, sends the Calusari out, but she gives Mulder and Scully a bit of the background. You know, they're responsible for the correct observance of sacred rites. She doesn't mention anything to do with ritual dancing, though. Mulder goes outside, speaks to the head of the group, who says that evil has always been here. It goes by different names: Cain, Lucifer, Hitler.
Comparing a child to Hitler, I think it's a strange list of names, you know. I mean, I thought it was a very odd list of names, kind of combination. I think comparing Charlie to Hitler, or comparing the evil in the house to Hitler, was a bit crass. And this idea that this evil's always been here and it will follow people and all that sort of stuff. It's introduced in this episode, and then you never hear about it in the rest of the series. And it's like you said before earlier, it's not clear whether this evil is possessing Charlie, or whether it's an evil twin, or whether it's because this Romanian woman married an American man, and the Calusari themselves are very funny. Like, they are dressed in very strange outfits, like buttoned up shirts with no ties, so they look a little bit dweeby. And they're different ages, aren't they? So there's the old guy, the middle-aged guy, and then the young guy who just looks perpetually puzzled. I actually find them quite amusing. And when I was discussing this episode with a friend a couple of weeks ago, she sort of said, like, well, where do they go after they've done the ritual? Like, do they go back to a hotel and play cards? Or they going to the local diner for a burger?
Yeah.
You know, how do you contact them? You know, do they live in America? You know, or have they flown over from Romania?
Yeah.
Just to help Golda.
And
like, what are they doing when they're not fighting evil?
I don't know. I mean, is it a full-time job being a member of the Calusari, or is it something you do in addition to a 9 to 5 job? I'm not sure.
Later in the episode, when Mulder somehow gets in touch with them, I think, how did he do it? Are they in the phone book? Do they have a hotline like 0800 exorcism? I mean,
yeah, I've got some issues with that part of the episode, but all in good time. We'll get there. Yeah, this idea of the thread of evil. I mean, there is an episode in season 8 called Empodocles or Empodocles. I'm not sure how you say it. Which also deals with evil that's passed on from person to person. But here, it's interesting as an idea. It's not I don't know if it's that relevant. I'm not sure if it's necessary to include.
Yeah, and I think Empodocles, however you say it, I think that episode does it much more effectively.
Yeah.
I think that episode's really creepy.
If they'd spent the few minutes that this is relevant to the episode dealing with, you know, the issue of child abuse and grief and everything, you know, maybe that would have been to the episode's benefit. Right, so in the house then, Maggie talks about her mother, you know, it's the stuff you mentioned. She's left behind Romanian superstitions, whereas her mother, you know, was disagreed with that. Yeah, she's handling things pretty well considering she's had 3 close family members die in quick succession. Scully decides they need to interview Charlie, basically. And that leads on to, it's a medical centre or a hospital of some kind. Kosef is back, she talks to Charlie. Charlie comes out with that he didn't hurt Golda, he blames Michael. And we had no way of knowing this before. This is where we learn that Michael was Charlie's stillborn twin. Charlie shouldn't know about him. Golda had wanted to perform a ritual of separation on him after Michael's death. Maggie had said no, it's just a superstition. So we're led to believe that if Golda had got her way at that point, none of the other bad things would have happened.
Yeah, and I take issue with that. I think a child dying at birth doesn't necessarily equal evil. Do you know what I mean? So this is yet again introducing another element that doesn't seem to fit with the rest of the story, you know. So Michael's evil because he died, you know.
Yeah, I don't know.
At that point, I was like, what?
Yeah, it's a bit of a leap, isn't it? From
Yeah.
Charlie has a bit of a seizure, unfortunately, at this point. And then he's being looked after, and a nurse enters the room. Now, there's a good moment here, I think, or it's a very creepy moment. It's where Charlie's in the bed, the nurse is tending to him, and from the dark space behind the door, Michael appears. I don't know. For me, that worked. That particular moment.
Yeah, and Charlie I took it when Charlie was saying, no, don't, please don't. I took it that he wasn't talking to the nurse who was about to inject him. I thought he was saying it to Michael, like, please, Michael, don't hit the nurse, like, don't hurt her, which implies that Charlie is really not in control of his evil twin, ghost, whatever. And then actually Charlie himself isn't really a bad kid. He just in a difficult situation.
He is which makes it more puzzling to me why he appeared so unsettling in the opening of the episode.
Well, he's a little bastard, really. I mean, because when the nurse says to him, "We're going to have to inject you," and he's like, "I don't want an injection," and she said, "Well, that's what happens when you spit out all your medicine."
Yeah.
You get the implication that he's just a difficult kid.
I suppose so. Yeah.
But he might be a difficult kid because his baby brother's been killed and his father's dead and his grandmother tried to attack him with a knife. I mean, this is kind of like child abuse.
Yeah. Yeah, so,
You know.
I don't know. I mean, the nurse gets attacked, and then Michael, posing as Charlie, convinces his mum to take him home without checking with any of the hospital staff. I mean, what I was wondering at this point was, why has he waited 3 months to, you know, if he's killed Teddy 3 months ago, why did he wait that time, and then he's killing people, you know, one after another straight, you know?
Well, I read it as that he wants his mother all to himself. He doesn't want Charlie there. I mean, he gives Charlie the balloon, I suppose, so maybe in the beginning. So maybe he does want Charlie involved, or I don't know. But it seemed to me that he really wants the little boy that then asks Mikey to go home. That's obviously Michael. But I feel that Michael, and she kind of realizes, doesn't she? Or she realizes that it's not right. Something's not right, because she sort of says, "Okay, we'll go home," and she's just very calm, but also kind of freaked out. I thought that he wanted his mother to himself, and now he's finally got his mother to himself. Like, he's obliterated the sibling competition, he's got rid of his dad and the pesky grandmother who was trying to, you know, prevent him from being evil.
Yeah, doesn't he then attempt to kill his mother as well?
But it's only because she starts doing the ritual.
Oh, I see.
So
Yep,
she
I see what you mean.
she takes him back to the house and makes him dinner.
Yeah.
And he does kind of torture her a little bit by saying, "Can we go to the park?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You know, can we ride the train, Marmy?" You know, which is chilling, actually.
Yeah.
I think Joel Palmer, the actor, does a really good job of acting.
Yeah,
like, that little line is creepy.
Yeah, I thought that was quite a nice touch. Not nice, but, you know, I thought it was an effective touch. But just before that moment, so Mulder and Scully see them leave from the window, but they see that Charlie's still in his bed. And then we see the nurse is alive. So, yeah, he's not that interested in the nurse. He just needed to harm her to get her out of the way. So Mulder sends Scully to the Holvey house, and Mulder says he's going to get some help.
And that's the great bit, isn't it? Because it's like, well, Scully, you know, 3 people have died already. Off you go. What's Scully going to do? Also, she's like a skeptic, non-believer. I mean, I guess she's a Catholic, so she does believe in the concept of good and evil. But I thought it was quite funny. It's like, off you go, Scully. And then he just sort of sends her off in the lift. I'm thinking, well, sending her off to deal with a demon child with nothing more than a gun. I mean, she's got no knowledge of exorcisms or esoteric religion or whatever. Like, what's she going to do? And then she says, "What are you going to do?" He's like, "I'm going to get help." And that's where I think he must have to call 0800 Calusari, because he pages them. Somehow he's got their number.
Somehow he gets through to them, yeah. So, yeah, we have that scene we just talked about where it's, can I have a balloon? Can we ride the train? Where he's kind of goading the mother. So she decides to perform her own ritual, but he surprises her, Michael does, and she confronts him with a knife. Right, then back in the medical centre, the Calusari arrive, okay? And it's intercut with Scully entering the house and investigating. And, you know, the director manages to whip up a bit of atmosphere in these scenes, which is good. Calusari perform their exorcism on Charlie. Mulder does fuck all, basically. He just stands there and watches them. Is this responsible FBI procedure? I wonder.
Yeah, I had a big problem.
I mean, I understand that he does turn out... He's vindicated, isn't he? Because it does turn out to be correct. And they do turn out... You know, their ritual does work. Having said that, yeah, I don't know. I
don't think we're the only ones to think this. From what I've read in online reviews and also in actual books, you know, compendiums and stuff to do with the X-Files, I think that this is a general consensus about this scene, is that, you know, there's four adult men holding down a little boy in a bed and essentially shouting at him and chanting at him and, I don't know, forcing, like, drawing stuff on him and stuff. I understand exorcism scenes are supposed to be creepy and unpleasant and scary, but I do feel personally that this is a really... I don't know. Mulder has no dialogue in this episode, and he basically holds down the little boy, and that feels to me like he's complicit, or, you know, like he's at least involved, you know, in something that could potentially be illegal. And in the same way in Hell Money, where Mulder and Scully sit and watch a crime or illegal activity being displayed and illegal activity happening in front of them, but they don't get involved because it's the idea of the American sort of American law enforcement and American authorities getting involved in something that is a tradition or something that's culturally sensitive about a different culture. It's a similar thing. They're not getting involved in this Romanian tradition, I guess, this exorcism ritual. And so Mulder sort of lets go of his whole FBI responsibility there and just gets involved, and no one in the hospital comes.
Well,
and
I was going to say
the walls are dripping.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, my experience of hospitals is that I don't think you could have an exorcism in them covertly. I think that you'd attract some kind of attention.
I think even if Mulder said something, like if he said, I wrote a line of dialogue and he was like, you know, are you sure you should be doing this, or stop, I think you're hurting him, or, you know, or something. But instead he just stands there passively, and then they tell him to hold his legs down.
Now don't get me wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I don't need to see him fill out a risk assessment form or anything. But I need some indication that he's thought about the, you know, the pros and cons of this.
It doesn't seem like very Mulder behaviour, actually. I don't think Mulder would sit by and I know that he believes in paranormal, but yeah, again, like we discussed this in this episode, they sit, they stand, they watch. You know, they observe.
Yeah,
and
that's right. And it's at this point, like you say, the fact he doesn't really have anything to say just reinforces the fact that Mulder and Scully, non-essential to the way this episode climaxes, basically. Yeah, like you say, the walls bleed yellow. I'm not sure about what that stuff was. And the Calusari say, don't look at it, talking about the boy, because the evil will see you, I think is the implication. Scully, though, now I've got a question about this. So what Scully sees is windows shatter, you know, for no apparent reason. She sees the character of Maggie pinned to the wall 6 feet off the ground, at one point speaking in a child's voice. And then Scully herself is flung across the room by an invisible force. Right, how does Scully explain this to herself, I want to know? Because I think the episode cheats on us a bit here, because if she's going to have a paranormal experience like this, I want to at least hear how she justifies it. Because by the time the next episode begins, it's back to the same, you know, it's back to the status quo where she's a die-in-the-wool skeptic. But this seems to take it a bit too far, I think. I think she sees too much, and too much happens to her, especially considering the fact it's kind of skated over afterwards.
Yeah, so at the end of the episode, she just meets up with Mulder in the corridor of the hospital. And it's like, hey, how'd it go, you know? And they're like, yeah, it's all right. And then, you know, of course, the Calusari speak to them, and then they leave. She doesn't look shaken up, really. She doesn't seem stressed or upset about it. And you're right, she's a skeptic, so she would have to think up some way. She would have to justify what happened to her rationally in her mind, but also she's a Catholic, so she's a Catholic, so she's got some sort of she's got a connection to religion that Mulder doesn't have, and I do think a connection to good versus evil and to mysticism in that way. So I actually think this would be upsetting for her.
Yeah,
you know,
and we don't really get any sense of the emotional impact that these events have on Mulder and Scully, if any. And
the Calusari as well, saying it knows you now. The evil has seen you and it knows you. That never shows up again in another episode. The evil doesn't seem to have followed Mulder. It doesn't seem to know. One of my friends has pointed out that Grotesque, the episode that comes after this, you know, Mulder has a kind of a connection to evil in that episode, and Mulder does have a connection to evil characters throughout the series. You know, like he does have this sort of thing where he's often pitched against this sort of like a serial killer or some sort of supernatural phenomenon. So you do kind of get the feeling that he does attract this sort of stuff, but it's never specifically this. The Calusari really make a big deal about how this evil goes from person to person. It's spotted Mulder. It's been an evil that's gone throughout time, all the way back to Cain and possibly Lucifer, you know, and yet you see, nothing happens after that. Like, it's not revisited in later episodes.
No, there's nothing you can tie back into this one, I don't think, anyway. No. Maybe that's for the best, though, Clara, to be honest. Maybe. I'm not sure a sequel to the Calusari would have been the best idea.
Yeah, I think maybe just leaving these lines of dialogue about evil following people out of the episode to begin with might have helped. I think straightforward, boy is possessed by evil, Calusari come and sort it out. I mean, it would be a simple story, but they threw a lot in the mix to try and make it cleverer than it was, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's to the episode's detriment overall. The way it's resolved then is that Michael's just about to strike Scully with a knife, and the other thing we've mentioned is it's another example in these early years of Scully in a perilous situation, which sometimes it works really well. Here it's done in a not particularly well-considered way. So the Calusari finish the exorcism and Michael disappears into ash. Again, I'd like to know how Scully explains that. Yeah, we get that scene you just mentioned where the Calusari head talks to Mulder, you must be careful, it knows you. And the episode ends with Mulder's voiceover, so what happens is that Charlie's staying under Maggie's care, so he's ostensibly he's been cured, or he's been saved. And Mulder finishes the episode with the words, I am disturbed by the warnings of the Calusari. Neither innocence nor vigilance may be protection against the howling heart of evil. The howling heart of evil is quite a stark note to end things on, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really abrupt ending, actually. I feel that they learn nothing and they achieve nothing. They end the episode pretty much the same way they started it. You know, I mean, obviously the evil's gone now, but Mulder and Scully are no more informed about anything. I mean, you can imagine them writing this up for Skinner, and then Skinner just looking at it, groaning, and then sticking it in a drawer and being like, oh God, not again. Yeah, and I don't really learn much about the Calusari either, really, I mean, felt a little bit like there's a potential in the idea of the Calusari, and that wasn't actually exploited enough or fulfilled, I suppose.
I agree. I think we've been quite harsh on this one, haven't we?
I feel I should have rated it a bit lower now. I rated it as 6, but
yeah,
maybe I'm changing my mind.
What we probably haven't really talked about as much is that I didn't find it boring to watch. I found it passed the time quite well. The episode zips along at a reasonable pace, and they do manage to conjure up a few, a good effective moments here and there. So, yeah, I don't think it's a good episode overall, I'm afraid. But I don't think it's one of the worst episodes of the series. Not quite. I don't think it's that bad.
Yeah, and you have to take it in context as well, I suppose, which I'm not doing, in the context of when it was actually shown, and in the context of the whole series of the X-Files. So, I wasn't watching a huge amount of TV, actually, to be honest, when it was first shown, so I don't actually know what else was on TV, really. But it's quite possible that this was this is more dramatic and sort of like horror-like storytelling on TV at the time, more compared to a lot of other series that were on at the time. There are some nice touches, like Maggie trying to do the ritual, although I think this must imply that all Romanians know how to do incantations, or maybe Maggie knows how to do it because Golda was so insistent about the supernatural. I don't know.
Yeah, but even so, the episode, these are the only Romanians, I think, that we see in the entire series. So we're left with the impression that, Romania is this place where everybody knows ritual magic and...
Yeah, which is funny because, I mean, I have worked with and know a fair amount of Eastern Europeans, and I mean, none of them have remote interest in like mystical religion. I mean, they're all like just normal people. None of them do incantations or anything, or kill dead chickens or anything. But when she does the incantation and she's striking the matches and putting them in the bowl of blood, and they're sort of sinking into the bowl of blood, I thought that was quite effective. There are some effective moments. I think the idea of being pecked by a chicken is pretty horrible. The idea of being strangled by a garage door is pretty horrible.
Yep. Yeah.
It's just unintentionally funny in places.
Yeah, I think it's an episode, so I would say it's less than the sum of its parts, if that makes sense. Some good pieces don't really cohere into a great episode overall, but they can't all be brilliant. This is at the end.
True. That's true.
This is at the end of the season. Occasionally, at the end of the seasons, you get a few episodes which you can tell the crew are running out of a bit of steam, and that probably accounts for a lot of it, I would say.
And it is better than a lot of other bad episodes. So this is far better than the one. Is it Tessos Bikos with the cats?
Tesso dos Bichos. Yep.
Tessos dos Bichos. It's far better than that, and it's far better than Space. I think almost anything's better than Space.
I agree. Having said that, if I never see this episode again, I won't be that unduly disturbed.
But you must continue to watch out for the evil.
Yeah.
That passes from person to person. Look out for scary kids with balloons.
Well, I'll be on the lookout, but remember, innocence nor vigilance may not be protection against the howling heart of evil.
It is over for now.
It's okay.
But you must be careful. It knows you.
Okay, Clara, so if you're willing, Do you want to take part in the X quiz for this episode?
Yeah, bring it on.
Bring it on. All right. 4 questions and a quote. So, question 1. How does Mulder describe Chuck Burks to Scully? This is in the first scene that you see Chuck.
Oh, no.
And he...
It's got a friend. I've got a friend. This is my friend Chuck, who is really good with a photographic software.
What I'm looking for has got a royal connection.
A royal connection.
Yeah.
Ooh.
No? All right.
I have no idea.
All right. He refers to him as the king of digital imaging.
Oh. That's good, actually.
Question 2. All right. This might be a tricky one. All right. What are 2 other terms for a swastika symbol, according to Mulder? So this is when they're in the X-Files office and Mulder's looking at an encyclopedia or something, and he gives Scully a bit of background on the symbol.
Well, he says it's a medieval symbol.
He does.
But I can't remember the words that he uses.
Yeah, these are 2 words I hadn't heard before. So he says a gammadion, which is Gamadion, or a filefot, Fylfot.
Filefot.
Filefot, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that probably is accurate, because that sounds like something that somebody would look up in an encyclopedia.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like something you'd make up for a TV episode.
No.
Right, I think you might have a better chance with this question. So question 3. Mr. Holvey mentions a few of Golda's superstitions. Can you name 2 of them?
Well, she spits on the ground at some point, doesn't she?
Yeah, that's one.
I can't remember. Something inspires her to spit on the ground. She throws chicken guts on the roof. And she starts feeding... She starts feeding Charlie and Teddy herbs and food?
Oh, yeah, well, we see her do that, don't we? Yeah, we see her putting the stuff in the saucepan, that's right. But the ones... Yeah, you got 2 of them. The ones I've got written down are she spits when anyone compliments the kids. She once poured hot water over the threshold of the house to ward off demons.
Yes, yeah.
She tied red strings around the kids' wrists.
Yeah.
And throwing chicken guts on the roof is the 4th one. All right, so you got 2 of those, so I'll give you a mark there. So 1 out of 3 so far. Question 4. What year did Chuck Burks go to India?
In the 70s?
It is.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it like 1979 or 1978?
It is 1979, well done. Yeah. Cool. So he mentions that before he was an academic, Chuck was on the hippie trail, apparently. So, all right, so that's 2 out of 4. And the final one is just a quote. You need to tell me who said it and roughly, at what point of the episode was it said. And the quote is, "Yeah, my grandfather used to take that for his stomach."
Oh, so this is said right in the first half of the episode where Scully's explaining what Munchausen by proxy is to Mulder, and he jokes that he doesn't know what Munchausen by proxy is, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's what my grandfather used to take for his stomach."
As Mulder one-liners go, this is not a very good one, I don't think.
No, because I think Munchausen by proxy doesn't sound in any way like a medicine that you would take for your stomach.
No.
I think Vibuti does.
In fairness, Scully doesn't seem that amused when he says it, so...
Typical Mulder one-liners.
Yeah.
Just rolls her eyes.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Clara. So 3 out of 5. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You don't need to retain that information about this episode any longer, so feel free to forget it instantly.
Make space in my brain.
Okay, so all that's left for me to do now is to say thanks again to Clara Cook. Now, Clara, you mentioned to me that you have your own blog. Do you want to tell us a bit about that before you go?
Yeah, so I started a blog not long ago with my friend Natalie, who's also an X-Files fan, and it's www.twooriginalgeeks.blogspot.co.uk. So it's 2 original geeks, like geek, yeah, just like a regular geek really. And we've sort of been reviewing. We reviewed the first episode of the X-Files. We're a really long blog post. We're sort of new to blogging, so it's in its infancy. So there's not a huge amount up there, but we've started to try and do more. And we just write about what we like, really. TV shows, films, little reviews, just sort of fun stuff. So yeah, head over, check it out. Tell us about how, what you think we should write about, or if you think we need any tips on blogging, because I think we do.
Excellent.
And yeah, that's it so far, really.
All right, so just give us the name of the blog one more time.
So it's twooriginalgeeks.blogspot.co.uk.
Fantastic. I'll check that out later. All right. If anyone wants to get in touch with me on Twitter, you can find me at csweeney758, and I'm happy to talk to people about the X-Files or anything. So, Clara, last thing I've just got to say to you is, Clara, you must be careful. It knows you. And
it really does, actually.
And
coming to podcasting.
Yeah, to our listeners, thanks for staying with us this far. Until next time, remember, trust no one.
The Xcast is produced and presented by Tony Black. part of the Black Hole Media podcast network. Title music is courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at I am Will AYE.